Let me introduce you our first speaker, Ecem Güvercin. She's from Bilkent University, and she's gonna make her talk named Tragedy of Commons and Justification of Efforts of Survival.
Hello, everyone. I am very excited to be here today. And today I will talk firstly about how survival is used as a justification of morality in history. And later I will talk about the term of tragedy of commons, and I will deliver an ethical question. And thirdly, I will talk about virtues and emotions, which are similarities between humans and animals. And even though there are considerable differences of these terms and how these terms are visible in humans and animals, the differences are still insufficient to be classed as totally different and unequal. And later I will conclude my speech. Firstly, I would like to ask a question about why morality exists. Is it an innate feature all living beings have regardless of their life experiences, or something shaped within their events and their life experiences, or even a different approach? Are they developing these moralities in order to obtain certain advantages, which is a totally different approach between these two, because it puts morality as a mean to humans? I know this is an enormous question, and one presentation will be insufficient to answer it. Nevertheless, my presentation will focus on a possible approach which could be suitable for all three opinions, and which is survival. Survival could be a motivation all living beings have innately in order to maximize their lifetime. And the living beings can shape their strategies and actions according to their experiences by learning which actions will maximize their survival. Or the third approach, they can use their influence to gather the material or non-material aspect to survive, which Thomas Hobbes defines the measurement of influence as power. When every individual tries to maximize their power in order to get the resources, which are scarce yet highly competitive, and most importantly, when there is no significant regulation mechanism which could protect individuals from each other in the pursuit of power, these conditions could be summarized as the state of nature. Hobbes defined in his book Leviathan these terms such as reputation and dignity, the qualities which could contribute to increase one's power, but not directly effective for their survival. Thus, I think we need to ask ourselves that why would a person who is already in a crucial advantage in state of nature would want reputation and nobility if they are already in an advantageous period to survive? When we look through Hobbes' ideas about these concepts, we may infer that these concepts are not necessarily make the individuals have the upper hand in the harsh conditions of state of nature, but they give the advantage in interpersonal relations, as the reputation will bring the devotion of people who are weaker but protected by the stronger people, and dignity provides the regulation of usage of power in the non-chaotic periods, or when war is avoided. In other words, peace, as Hobbes defines in his book. Having dignity increases one person's reputation, so dignity and reputation are hugely interconnected terms. They could be valuable as the person would need to feel secure about the survival rates in state of nature, especially when the other individuals of the population has a similar power ratio, as in a population when every people has a similar power ratio to survive, one can be never sure about what can happen to them. They can lose their advantage, or worse, they can lose their life. So if we assume that the person's perception of threat is dependent on the other individuals, as we may infer from Hobbes, then we may also claim that the person is responsible towards the others for how much power they have, as the people's identities are defined by their power in the social interactions. More responsibility towards the others and more social interactions, which leads to reputation, also brings more representation to individuals in the society. More representation in a social system could mean an advantage in the decision-making process in social actions and governance. In order to protect their own privileges and to create the justification of the social system, which is necessary for the social system sustainability, the ones who have higher representation would create their own social rule, which ultimately leads to Nietzsche's claims that the nobility came from reputation and power will be a catalyzer for the top of the social hierarchy to determine moral standards as an instrument to secure their survival and their power. And every person, according to their social stance in the social class, have their own etiquettes to follow and own moralities to follow. So far, we defined power and reputation as a legitimacy for morals and social classes. On the other hand, in order to understand the technical mechanisms of morality, we should ask two questions, which are, firstly, how can a person increase their survival rate and their social class? And secondly, is this option available for every person in the society? For answering these questions, I would actually not focus on reputation as an answer for the first question, because these concepts are determined by other people and their perception of them, which I previously mentioned that they are highly subjective, so we cannot exactly measure that. Instead, I will focus on obtaining natural resources, which is not a subjective determinant on every individual having a chance to do so. I actually acknowledge that every person's opportunities to get natural resources can differ from each other, and the ones who are advantageous would get more opportunities to gather natural resources. But I will assume that every person has at least a chance bigger than 0 to get them. So assuming that every person would engage in an attempt to increase their power as a rational action, or if they already satisfied with their social impact in the society, they will engage on these acts in order to preserve their power. And these collective actions of obtaining natural resources in order to maximize their survival can actually result in a total decrease in natural resources and total welfare of species in general, which could be defined as a tragedy of commons. So tragedy of commons is a term used in order to explain the environmental damage given by the individual pursuit of natural resources. Thus, we can ask an ethical question here, which is also very crucial for my presentation. If the actions engaged in order to increase the survival could be considered as moral actions, or was considered as moral actions in history, could tragedy of commons be morally justified, which increases the individual survival rate, but eventually decreases total welfare? This picture on the slide is a visualization of Arne Naes' deep ecology philosophy, which he claims that animals have intrinsic value. Thus, humans should live as an integral part of the ecosystem instead of using environment as a mean toward reaching towards their goals. However, we should ask that, why should we point out the similarities between humans and animals if we want to prove their intrinsic values? Because if we want to attribute their worth independent from humans, then the similarities shouldn't have been necessary. However, in my opinion, the ecosystem demonstrates possible common grounds with the communities humans built in history. Not with the social order, with hierarchy, but instead the prevalence of virtues the living beings have and the representation on the ecological system. If humankind is showing efforts of regulation of harmful behaviors towards the others in the social life, which we defined as having dignity in the previous slides, then demonstrating a similar approach towards the living beings in the ecosystem should be expected instead of placing humans as a top of social hierarchy of the ecosystem. I have 2 points for the presentation, which are first, the virtuous qualities may not be excluded to humans. And secondly, all living beings have the representation in the ecological system, which I will elaborate on the next slides. So how virtue could be defined? Hume's explanation of virtue includes prosocial behaviors, which enhances the public welfare, the utility of the society, and affirmation of the adjectives such as benevolence and friendship. Although Hume talks about virtue as a characteristic of human cooperation in order to increase the total utility of humans, I think demonstrating harmony and solidarity are not unique aspects of humankind. We may state that one of the most different factors of humans and animals' social behaviors that the punitive methods of not aligning virtues in the society and community. As Hume argues, people who are not collaborated with the social norms can be punished by the law system. Although codified laws are non-existent within the animal life, the social exclusion could be indeed an effective mechanism for punitive methods, which is an effective behavior pattern in order to ensure social cooperation, which adjusts the social behaviors with a similar system of reputation, as if an individual is excluded from social life, their cooperation will be suspected, and these social behaviors will be highly discouraged towards the other individuals or members of the society or the community. So this will be not only a punitive system, but also a preventive measure, which also codified laws follow that. Another social behavior, which is a variable of an increase in trust and reputation, could be social bonds. We may state that the sphere of bonding varies between humans and animals, which is considerably wider with humans, as Hume defines the wide social bonds, interactions, and systemized social structures as civilizations. Nevertheless, the main function is still same within the different species, as division of labor, which is a crucial part of the social structures, could be also observable in animals, as the effective distribution of labor, or in other words, necessities to survive, can also be seen in animals as an integral part of surviving. So all these differences are insufficient to exclude animals from having virtues. Next, we need to identify that the role of rationality and emotions in shaping social life and the ecosystem. According to Kant, rationality is the main aspect to form universal laws, which creates in order to order in social life. We may state that the people who has more power could have better opportunities to shape universal laws, with the assumption of being more rational will provide more survival skills, as we defined as moral. If we defined morality as a source of a regulation system, and if we defined codified laws as the systemized version of norms and morality of social life, then we can state that the actions taken in order to survive will be integral with rational actions and laws themselves. On the other hand, Arnenes argues that if emotions are able to influence other social behaviors in the humankind, then the different social reactions would eventually create different social etiquettes and ultimately the main regulator of social interactions. This is very important because we previously assumed that rationality is the key aspect of social norms and behaviors, but Arnenes argues that emotions could have played a much bigger role in living as an integral part of the society. And if emotions are a significant factor to determine reputation and more significantly, a component of shaping social facts, then we may claim that animals can also have their representation in the nature to influence it, as their actions are the result of their emotions and instincts. So to conclude, we defined increasing power and gaining influence. In other words, which actions are increase the rate of survival, could be a fundamental source of moral, and eventually it will create social norms. And lastly, they can be codified in order to sustain the social system and hierarchy. However, survival loses its legitimacy when they are done even though when they are done in the name of survival, it's slowly losing its legitimacy when it harms other species. As I mentioned before, there is no significant difference that between civilizations humans build and the ecosystem which all living beings live all together. So if we define punitive laws and actions which could discourage humans to commit, then the same should be applied for ecosystem. Otherwise, it will be a self-contradicting action. Thank you for listening my talk, and I am looking forward for the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Ecem.